Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Amy Myers, and we're so happy to have you here with us this afternoon for the first webinar in our series, Supporting Student Success with Interim Assessments Shared Practices webinar series, brought to you by the California Department of Education. The other two webinars will take place on the next two Tuesday afternoons on September the 24th and October 1st. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass things off to Rebecca Bowers, an Education Programs Consultant with the CDE, who's going to start us off. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Amy. I am Rebecca Bowers with CDE's Interim and Formative Assessments Office, and I'm very excited to be with you today to hear California educators share how they use the interim assessments and related resources available from the state in their own districts and classrooms. The interim assessments are available year-round, and they provide meaningful information to guide instruction and support student learning. During the 2023-24 school year, more than 9.3 million Smarter Balance interim assessments for English language arts, literacy, and mathematics were started across more than 1,400 LEAs in California. As a bit of background, we started these shared practices as a way to highlight the different ways in which educators around the state are using different state-provided resources. You may remember that last year we held a shared practices series on tools for teachers and related resources. This year we are focusing on the use of interim assessments. It can be very helpful to hear from others what has worked or maybe not worked for them. Our hope is that educators can get ideas on how they might best implement the interim assessments into their instructional planning. So today we will hear from a variety of presenters from different local educational agencies or LEAs, all of different sizes, as well as educators with different roles, including teachers, school administrators, district administrators, and even staff from a county office of education. So in a few moments, we will begin hearing from August Deshay and Amy Eastman from Humboldt County, Shannon Bosetti and Kristen McElvain from Reading Elementary School District, and finally, Jennifer Bourgeois and Nasli Spence from Fontana Unified School District. With the rich amount of experience today's presenters have, and while each could speak volumes about their local use of interim assessments, each will focus on a specific aspect of that experience. August Deshay and Amy Eastman from Humboldt County will share how they promote and use interim assessments locally. Shannon Bosetti and Kristen McElvain from Reading Elementary School District will share how they use interim assessments to support teaching and learning. Jennifer Bourgeois and Nasli Spence from Fontana Unified School District will share how they use interim assessment resources and data to support students. And after each set of presenters, we will stop to answer a few questions that were entered into the Q&A. So be sure to use that feature in Zoom. I see a few of you doing so already, to enter any questions you have during the presentation. So before we begin hearing from our presenters, I'd like to take a step back to do a bit of level setting and provide an overview of how the interim assessments fit into California's comprehensive system of assessments. The interim assessments are one of three main components of the system. The other two components are the end-of-year summative, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, and tools for teachers, which is the formative assessment component. All three components of the system are meant to be resources used together to support teaching and learning of state standards throughout the school year, with the ultimate goal of students being ready by the end of high school for college and career. So as mentioned, the interim assessments are part of the complete California assessment system. This includes the Smarter Balanced interim assessments for ELA and mathematics, and the California Science Test, or CAASPP, interim assessments, which fall under the CAASPP umbrella, or the California Assessments of Student Performance and Progress. The ELPAC, or English Language Proficiency Assessments for California, has its own set of interim assessments. Today's webinar will focus on the Smarter Balance interim assessments for ELA and mathematics. Next Tuesday's webinar will focus on the ELPAC interim assessments, and the series will conclude with our final webinar about the CAASPP interim assessments. So if you or any of your colleagues plan to use either of those sets of interim assessments, you might consider tuning into the next 2 sessions. So let's focus in on a quick overview of the Smarter Balance interim assessments for English, language arts, literacy, and mathematics. There continue to be 3 types of Smarter Balance interim assessments available for both ELA and mathematics. There are the Interim Comprehensive Assessments, or ICAs, which cover the broadest content, most similar to the Smarter Balance Summative Assessments. Do keep in mind, however, that California will continue to use the adjusted blueprint for the summative assessment. So the ICA is longer than the adjusted blueprint for the summative assessment. Moving on to the interim assessment blocks, or IABs, they focus on smaller sets of related concepts and provide more detailed information for instructional purposes. And finally, the focused IABs, which assess even smaller sets of content, and generally 1 to 3 assessment targets. Between these 3 types of Smarter Balance interims, there are over 220 interim assessments to choose from this school year. Specifically 128 for ELA and 100 for math. And as a reminder, the interim assessments can be used at any grade level, not just the grade level of the student. Now that I've shared which interim assessments educators can choose from, I'd like to share a few important key considerations for their use. First, the interim assessments are optional assessments with a lot of flexibility in when and how they are used. A nice feature of the interim assessments is that they can be used in either a standardized manner, such as a benchmark assessment, or they can be used in a formative manner, such as embedding them into classroom instruction. Teacher interest in using the interims can really be boosted when they have that flexibility to choose which interims to use and when and how to use them. We encourage LEA coordinators and administrators to establish Test Operations Management System, or TOMS, accounts for staff at the beginning of the school year, so staff have immediate access to both interims and tools for teachers. Both resources are available year-round, not just within the school year. There is a link provided in your resource guide for the TOMS user guide, which provides more information about those different TOMS roles. Additional considerations are that interim assessment items are secure. This means that only LEA staff and students may have access to them. By law, the interim assessments cannot be used for any high-stakes purpose, and this includes but is not limited to teacher evaluation, accountability, grade promotion or retention, graduation, and reclassification of English learners. Education Code Section 60642.7b contains additional information or examples of uses that are prohibited. Another key consideration, which is not law but we strongly encourage, is to use multiple measures in determining a student's level of proficiency and not making that determination based solely on the performance of one interim assessment, or even worse, on the basis of just a few items or questions from an interim assessment. Now for the exciting part. We will now get to hear from 2 educators from Humboldt County, Augusta Shea and Amy Eastman, who will share how they promote and use Smarter Balance interim assessments locally. Be sure to listen in for any ideas that might be useful to you. As a reminder, feel free to post questions into the Q&A feature in Zoom. There will be time for us to read through and answer questions after we hear from August and Amy. So with that, August, I'll turn it over to you. August,
you're on mute.
Thanks, Rebecca. I believe it's the next slide that we'll begin on. Thank you. So one of my roles at our County Office of Education is to provide assessment support to the 31 school districts and 14 charter schools throughout Humboldt County. Our schools range in enrollment from Greenpoint School District, which has all of 3 students, to our largest school district, Eureka City Schools, which is a unified district with just under 4,000 students. As a former Humboldt County classroom teacher, principal, and superintendent principal, I have a deep appreciation for the support that our County Office of Education provides to our many and diverse districts and charters, including support with administering Smarter Balance, ELA, and math interim assessments. With more than 40 LEAs in Humboldt County, it's impossible to capture them all on one slide. The information seen here represents our county as a whole, which includes 7% English language learners, 17% special education students, and 62% students who are considered socioeconomically disadvantaged. The 88 schools that serve our county's 17,000 plus TK through grade 12 students vary in enrollment, student demographics, and the level of on-site support for teachers. Thanks to my role at the county office, I am fortunate to get to visit schools all across Humboldt County when they request support implementing or fine-tuning the use of interim assessments, including Amy's school, Redwood Preparatory Charter, which she'll talk more about in a few minutes. Given the wide range of schools that I work with, each with unique needs, I offer a variety of supports, customizing trainings whenever possible. The primary focus of all my work is to eliminate barriers and build confidence so teachers can utilize interim assessments right away. Each fall, I offer regional trainings on interim assessments. These live virtual trainings introduce or refresh teachers and administrators to the formats and uses of interim assessments. I cover how to select the right interim assessment, begin a testing session, analyze interim assessment data, and apply the results to future lessons and follow-up assessment sessions. Each of the virtual trainings is recorded and shared with LEAs so that it can be viewed asynchronously with staff. I also visit schools to provide site-level workshops. These workshops are tailored to the individual needs of the school or charter. Meeting in advance, the school administrator and I determine what will be of most use for the teachers. Some of these trainings are mostly introductory, focusing on the basics of interim assessments, while other sessions start with an analysis of the previous year's summative data to create a roadmap of how selected interim assessments can be paired with specific units of study to address areas of need. Having an opportunity to work with colleagues and interface with tools and supports is an essential part of these workshops. Finally, teachers and administrators can request one-on-one meetings, which is how I sat down with Amy and her charter director late last winter to look at her interim assessment results. These one-on-one meetings are more open-ended than the regional trainings or the site-level workshops, and they look more similar to a coaching session than a workshop, focusing on the specific needs of the teacher and their students. Regardless of the format of the support being provided, I have 3 primary goals when I'm working with teachers and administrators. First and foremost is to help teachers understand the benefits of interim assessments. Waiting for the summative assessment window to arrive in the spring before thinking about CAASPP for the first time that year can be tempting given the many demands on teacher schedule. However, by utilizing the wide variety of interim assessments, the flexibility in administration, teachers can use the interim assessments to help students prepare for the summative assessments and inform their teaching. Next, I aim to support planning, administration, and analysis of the interim assessments. This includes helping administrators and teachers understand things like rostering classes, deciding which interim assessments to start with, and how to analyze results and find resources to address areas of need. And finally, and most importantly, as a result of using interim assessments, teachers and students build confidence. With the summative assessments, build confidence with the summative assessments, knowing your students are prepared for both the content and the testing platform of the Smarter Balance summative assessments decreases stress, allowing students the best opportunity to demonstrate their content knowledge. So looking at some tools, successfully navigating the interim assessments involves knowing how to utilize all of the elements found on the CAASPP website. So I spend time introducing teachers to them during the more introductory sessions, and then we dive deeper during the more focused sessions. First up, as Rebecca mentioned, is TOMS, or the Test Operations Management System, which is familiar to all who have administered summative assessments, but refamiliarizing oneself in the context of selecting and administering interim assessments is an important place to start interim assessment training. The teacher hand scoring system, which you'll often see shortened to THSS, is necessary for teachers to get results if the interim assessment administered includes a hand scored item. Since hand scoring may be intimidating to someone new to interim assessments, I often encourage those wanting a speedy onboarding and early success to skip interim assessments that require hand scored items, at least at first. There are many interim assessments in ELA and math that do not require hand scoring, meaning test results can be ready within minutes of administration. However, the value of hand scoring student responses using the provided rubrics can be invaluable to understanding how to best support students preparing for performance tasks on the summative assessments. The California Educator Reporting System, CERS, is a tool that many teachers may be unfamiliar with, but once they see what it can do to inform their teaching, it becomes a powerful ally when giving interim assessments. Once students are assigned to teachers, CERS is the place to view interim and summative test results. In my one-on-one meetings, this is where we spend most of our time, looking for trends in both the class and individual student level to decide on next steps. There's a CERS sandbox, which is a great place to play around before you administer your first interim assessment to get an idea of what it can tell you about your students' performance. Finally, Tools for Teachers is where we conclude all of the trainings as a way to connect teachers to resources specifically aligned to the interim assessments. Links to the Tools for Teachers Interim Connections playlist are embedded in CERS when viewing student results, allowing for quick access to short, engaging lessons aimed directly at supporting the targets addressed in the interim assessments. And speaking of teachers directly supporting students, I'll now hand it off to Amy.
Thanks, August. Good afternoon. My name is Amy Eastman, and I am the fourth grade teacher at Redwood Preparatory Charter School here in Fortuna. Our school is an independent charter school with a total enrollment of 236 students, and that's TK through 8th grade. I'm the only fourth grade teacher, as we only have one class per grade level. This means that although I have a grade level band that I collaborate with and work with on a routine basis, I don't have any specific fourth grade teachers on my campus. This is my 18th year of teaching, but it's really only been in the last few years that I have started working with the interim assessments, and really just this past year that I have really dived deep into the different resources that are available through this. It's because I don't have a large team of fourth grade teachers on campus to collaborate with that it's vital I utilize the skill set and resources that the Humboldt County Office of Education provides, as August has mentioned, which is how I began my journey with the Smarter Balanced interim assessments. So today I'm going to walk you through the benefits that I have found with using the Smarter Balanced interim assessments in my classroom. First, I'd like to start with how the teacher perspective and how I was able to remove the barriers that had caused my hesitance in using the Smarter Balanced interim assessments up to this point. To set the scene, I'll start by saying I had tried the interim assessments in math a time or two, but honestly, I was unaware and really didn't feel comfortable with the best method to implement them in a manageable way for me and my students in my classroom. I had other colleagues that had used them regularly, but I had not been able to embrace those tools for my needs and in response to the needs of my students. Our director had arranged for August from the county office to attend our weekly staff meeting to provide a preliminary training and kind of get us ramped up for our teachers in 3rd through 8th grade. At this training, he explained how to select an interim, give the interim, and went over some of the data options that could be accessed following the assessment, as well as the Tools for Teachers website, as he mentioned in his presentation, that we were able to then tap into for expanding on certain topics, depending on what our student scores showed. His training was the impetus that I needed to get more fully involved in using the interims. And it's really what got me excited about using this in my classroom. So this brings me to the benefits for our teachers. August also offered to return to campus once I had given my initial interim assessment to review those scores and to learn more about the use of the tools and ways to address the needs of my students that were identified with their assessments. This was an eye-opening process. It was really easy to get onto, assign, and proctor the interim assessment, and the data that I gleaned from these assessment scores was just invaluable to my teaching process. In the meeting with August, both my director and I began to see more and more the uses that and ways that our entire group, 3rd through 8th grade, could really utilize these tools. I was able to identify specific standards and topics for additional support, and some of them being done in a whole group or in a small group setting. Not only were there monumental benefits used in my teaching, but my students benefited equally. So lastly, I'll touch on the benefits for my students. We took a number of math interim assessments in the 2nd trimester last year. And by the time we were taking the Smarter Balanced assessments at the end of the school year, my students were way more comfortable with the login process, the secured browser settings, and the tools that were available to them on the test delivery system during their testing session. This really alleviated unnecessary pressure and confusion, as August had mentioned, for the state testing period. And I feel, based on their feedback, it really allowed for them to focus more on the content of the assessments themselves. The ultimate benefit, of course, to my students was the additional support that I was able to put in place based on their needs that were identified in the data collected. So let's talk about what this actually looked like in my classroom. Naturally, with this new resource and the knowledge that I had about my students' achievement, given their scores on the first interim I assigned, it was time to plan how to use this in my room. I was able to access CERS, or the California Educator Reporting System, as August mentioned, to look at each individual question, see which students had missed the question, and construct my instructional guide on how to address their needs. I accessed the Tools for Teachers website, which was directly linked from CERS to the topic that I had assessed. This included ideas for small group instruction and intervention techniques as well. There were games and activities that were included in these resources to really make sure that I was reaching every student. Depending on what I saw in terms of trends in the data that was represented, I was able to then decide whether I needed to address the needs of my students in a whole group setting or in a small group with more targeted setting. The website, its links, and the resources available are extensive. It was really super exciting to see all the possibilities and the tools that were right at my fingertips and catered directly to what my students needed. I have found that using the Smarter Balanced interim assessments for both pre and post instruction and assessment purposes is really helpful, in addition to the math curriculum that our school uses and its built-in assessments. So now, having taken these first steps into using the interim assessments, having gotten my feet wet with math, where do I go from here? With this framework in place, I see the following goals being my next steps as I continue my journey with the interims. I'd like to become more familiar with and comfortable using CERS one element at a time, and likely with the help of August. Looking into and trying my hand at hand scoring. I would like to integrate different interim assessments into my year curriculum plan, beginning with math and eventually followed up by English language arts. I want to continue working with my director and my teaching colleagues on site to implement these strategies from 3rd to 8th grade on our campus and to really dive deeper about what works with what they're doing in their classrooms. And then, of course, I would like to continue our partnership and work with the Humboldt County Office of Education to learn more and fully utilize the interims to the benefit of all my students. So in closing today, I hope that by hearing my story about the use of interim assessments in my classroom, whether you work in a large school district with multiple curriculum specialists and grade level partners, or you work in a small group, independent charter as I do, you are able to take the first step in assigning your first interim.
Thank you so much, Amy and August. We can't thank you enough for sharing all the great information you guys have, especially coming from the district and school sites that you guys are at. So it's really neat how educators from the county office and the schools work so closely together in Humboldt County, and how the trainings at the county level are really customized to fit the teacher's needs. And now we do have time to answer a few questions, and I see some coming up in the chat. So August and Amy, you can mark which ones you want to answer live, and I'll shoot them over to you in just a moment. I do have a few that are more global, so I'll start with those. There was one about how staff members from schools and districts, which are smaller, tend to wear many hats. And with that, you know, there are many different roles that each educator has. So it's clear that you and Amy do wear many hats. What advice do each of you have for educators who are a bit overwhelmed and may be reluctant to use the interim assessment? So how might you mentioned a lot of different resources and ways, but what is maybe one tip you have for them?
Well, my tip, coming from supporting a wide variety of different schools, and as Amy mentioned, very different sizes as well, is start small. So just jump in there. Don't expect to have to be able to complete an interim comprehensive assessment, for instance, as your first one. And as I mentioned earlier, I encourage folks to not worry about hand scoring the first couple of times, just to get their sea legs under them, and then later on they can jump in and try their hand at that.
Great. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to follow up and just say that I think my biggest tip would be to not hesitate to ask questions. I think a lot of times when we're working in a smaller district, it's like sometimes you can kind of feel like you're on the ice floe by yourself. And I think it's important to really collaborate and feel free to ask those questions and figure out things one step at a time.
I think that's great. I know one of the phrases we use a lot within the CDE is start small. And so I think that's basically what both of you guys are saying. August mentioned the ICA, which is a lot larger and longer, covers a lot of content there, so that may be overwhelming. So yeah, definitely the IABs and focused IABs are a good option. And yes, I second that. Collaborate, ask questions. No question is too small or too big. Just go for it. So thank you so much. I do have another question that popped up. It said, are your resources available for all of us? And yes, Amy from the Sacramento County Office of Education has posted, and Kasha has posted the PowerPoint and resource guide. So it's a link in the chat. If you click on that, it will take you to the resources folder. Many of the links that were, or the resources that were mentioned in the presentation are going to be embedded in that resource guide. And a few resources are also in there as well that have been added, such as the PowerPoint. So you can go ahead and access the PowerPoint for a later time. I do see a question too about hand scoring. That's always a question we get a lot. And it says, would someone be able to guide us in how to hand score on our campus. So I will mention a few resources that the CDE provides. We do have our interim and formative assessment training series, which is offered in the summer. And then we had one in early fall. It was our back to school sessions that were available. And there is module 3 is all about hand scoring. So on the different interims, ELA, math, CAASPP, and ELPAC. Those are finished now, but you can go onto the CAASPP and ELPAC website under the trainings tab, and it'll be upcoming training and opportunities. But then there is a section on demand. So those have finished, but they are recorded tools and resources. So if you go to the recorded option, you will see that the materials are posted there, as well as for hand scoring, we have on-demand modules. So if your educators do want to go through that same training that the live webinars did for hand scoring, they can look under the on-demand options and walk through the modules there for ELA or math. And you can do that together as a PLC, kind of what Amy was mentioning, working together, or you can do it on your own as well. So I'd recommend that. I do see a couple more questions coming in. August or Amy, if you have any you want to answer, feel free to chime in. I'll keep looking.
I think if I could, one that came in regarding can intervention teachers administer and analyze IABs when they're not a classroom teacher? Yes. And so at my site level trainings, we invite folks to come that may have a benefit in both administering and analyzing them. So depending on the level of permission that's designated by your site level coordinator, you can give permissions even to an intervention teacher to be able to access the results of the students that they work with. It's a great benefit.
Thank you. I see a similar question. Does your district give a day or time to review and hand score? Because time is always an issue. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations for that?
So I will say personally, my school district does not allow like a specific time, but as we know, time is of the essence here, and always hard to come up with enough of it. So I think the main thing is I would take the first step by talking to your administrator and just finding out from them if there's a way that they could set aside time during a professional development day or at the end of a staff meeting or something where you might be able to fit some time in that way.
Thank you. Yes. And I do see one question about intervention teachers. So it says, can an intervention teacher administer and analyze an IAB when they are not in the class, not a classroom teacher? So yes, this is possible. You would need to contact your administrator to ensure that you have a TOMS role that administers interim assessment. So an IA only role or a TATE role, and then make sure the testing coordinator has made rosters and SIRs that include you, so you can see the results in the reporting system or SIRs. And I do see, maybe we'll take one more question. Oh, they're coming in. Keep them coming and we'll answer them on the background too. So there is a question about teaching to the test. So I know a lot of these resources that you mentioned in interims can be, some people are reluctant because they think it could be teaching to the test. Do you have any advice for that?
I'll chime in on this one first. August, I don't know if you have something else to say too, but I completely agree. I understand that idea of the fact that it feels as though we're teaching to the test. And the way that I chose to kind of reframe that and to rephrase that is really just utilizing this as another tool for finding out exactly how my students are performing on different topics, and really choosing to look at it as the added bonus is that they're getting this exposure to the testing system and the tools, and really helping to alleviate some of that pressure and stress that comes up taking the end of the year assessments. But it was kind of one of those things where I had to reframe it in my mind and really focus on what it can offer for me to be able to better access their needs.
And I'll just add to that, the summative assessments are a reality that all of our students in our classrooms face. And so the interim assessments are one of the best ways to help eliminate barriers for your students to demonstrate what they know.
Excellent. Yeah, that is the barriers someone mentioned, the vocabulary too. That's important vocabulary, the testing interface, it's the same as the summative. So there are so many great reasons to use the interim assessments for that purpose, but also, then the students can just focus on the content and what they know when they get to the summatives and not have that barrier. So I completely agree. We do have more questions, so we will be answering them, typing them in. If you do want to answer them live, just note that and we can maybe add them in later. But we're going to move on to the next LEA. Thank you so much, Amy and August. That was wonderful. It's great to hear how you guys work together so well across different roles. So now we are going to turn it over to our next set of presenters from Reading Elementary School District. Shannon Bossetti and Kristen McElvain. They will share ways they use the interim assessments to support teaching and learning. So we'll start off with Shannon.
Thank you, Rebecca. My name is Shannon Bossetti, and I currently serve as the assistant principal at Sequoia Middle School here in Reading, California. And previously, I held a position of technology coach and the assessment coordinator for the district. So a little bit about our district. Reading School District is about 2 hours north of Sacramento. We have 8 total schools, 4 kindergarten through 5th grade schools, 2 K-8s, 1 comprehensive middle school, and we have a community day school. The demographic information seen here represents our district with approximately 2,890 students. 2% of our population is English language learner. 19% of our population is special education students, and 69% of our population is socioeconomically disadvantaged. As Rebecca, August, and Amy have all mentioned, the use of interim assessments can have measurable impacts within the classroom and district-wide. In our case, our district language arts and math unit assessments were not yielding the desired results on the end of the year Smarter Balance, summative English language arts, and math assessments. The curriculum unit assessments addressed a broad range of standards and skills, making it challenging to effectively target areas for reteaching and intervention. As the district assessment coordinator, I initially implemented various components of the interim assessment resources that Rebecca mentioned earlier, but encountered little teacher buy-in. However, after participating in a similar webinar and reflecting on our results, our leadership team recognized the significant benefits of interim assessments. We decided to transition toward using interim assessments as summative evaluations throughout the year, focusing on specific standards and skills that students were mastering. This approach allowed us to align learning targets more precisely and ensure that the assessments mirrored the same language, item types, and depth of knowledge as the summative assessments. This consistency provided particularly beneficial for students with special learning disabilities, as it allowed them to familiarize themselves with their testing accommodations and designated supports in an environment similar to that summative assessment. We extended this strategy to our general education students as well. Frequent changes in assessment platforms had been ineffective, and we realized that navigating different systems posed challenges during summative assessment time. By adopting the interim assessments consistently, we addressed both accessibility issues and the difficulties of navigating multiple platforms. Our key question as a district was, what is the best approach for implementation? Working with our instructional team, which included the Director of Curriculum and Instruction, our district-wide TOSA, and myself, we adjusted our math and ELA pacing guides for grades 3rd through 8th to incorporate interim assessment blocks, or IABs, and focus interim assessment blocks, or FIABs, that align more closely with the standards covered in each unit. This gradual transition allowed us to provide ongoing professional development and instructional support throughout the year across all sites. Kristen McIlvain, who was an integral part of this process, will now share her experiences with the transition and how the use of interim assessments have enhanced both her teaching and student outcomes.
Thank you, Shannon. So my name is Kristen McIlvain, and my educational experience has all been in the classroom. I am starting my 15th year, and I'm excited to be in 5th grade. Previously, I taught in junior high for 10 years, teaching 8th grade, and before that, I started my career teaching 1st grade. So as Shannon shared, our curriculum assessments just were not preparing our students for the summative end of the year test. And so what we decided to do as a district was to integrate the focus interim assessment blocks as our end of unit summative tests. And what we did is we got together in district-wide collaborations to identify which FIABs or IABs aligned with the content that we were teaching, matching our essential standards. And then we used the FIABs at the end of the unit to gauge student understanding. And although we use these tests to get a summative idea at the end of a unit, we use the data that we got formatively to instruct our teaching. And what we were able to do with this data was to decide what students were mastering concepts and what we needed to reteach. For example, when I administered the expressions and equations FIAB in October, my 8th grade students really struggled and they actually did not perform well on that assessment. So when we re-looked at the FIAB, we discovered that there were some concepts that we just had not covered yet in our regular instruction. So we continued learning our content, and then we retook the same FIAB in February. When we were able to look at our results and compare the two assessments, we saw growth between the two sessions, and my students were really motivated. And what this did is it created buy-in for using the FIABs as a preparation tool for the summative test in May.
Thank you, Kristen. As the year progressed, the benefits using these interim assessments became increasingly evident. Teachers were energized and excited to continue the process, and we observed several areas of growth in our summative data. Our participation rates improved not only among our general education population, but also within our special education population. This was largely due to students becoming more familiar and comfortable with the test navigation, their accommodations, and a consistent testing environment throughout the year. As a district, these improvements led to fewer opt-outs and higher overall participation. It's always great to see that this hard work of so many shows in student growth. And in terms of performance, we saw notable growth in both ELA and math. Specifically, 4 out of our 6 grades showed improvement in math, and 2 out of the 6 grades improved in their English language arts summative assessment. With the increased buy-in and district-wide growth on the summative assessments, we worked closely with our professional learning communities to focus on areas for improvement. Recognizing that teachers are the experts in the classroom, we formed our PLC committees of educators from grades 3rd through 8 at the end of last school year to enhance assessments aligned in both ELA and math. The committee also incorporated various lesson resources from the Tools for Teachers into their pacing guides. Additionally, we developed a system-wide data collection spreadsheet to inform instruction by utilizing data from the California Educator Reporting System, or CERS, and other district-wide supplemental assessment programs such as MobyMax and STAR. This year, teachers will be implementing the updated pacing and administer the IABs and FIABs based on the assessment calendar developed by the committee. After each assessment, site-wide project technicians will input student scaled scores from CERS into grade level spreadsheets. This will enable teachers to collaborate with colleagues across grade levels using real-time data to compare results from other district-wide formative assessments and adjust instruction accordingly. From those collaborations and that data analysis, teachers will be able to use Tools for Teacher lessons aligned with the interim assessments to reteach or review as needed. One key benefit I found from various webinars and external supports was access to resources that helped me transform plans into actionable steps. One of the district's biggest challenges was addressing reoccurring questions from teachers and support staff about the difference between what's an accommodation and what's a designated support, and how do we provide students with practice opportunities, and how do we logistically enter this information into our SIS and TOM systems. We created a streamlined system using the resource mentioned above, the accommodations and designated supports resource, which greatly simplified this process. Another invaluable resource during the early stages of selecting the appropriate IEB or FIEB was provided by the Riverside County Office of Education. They organized all IEBs by grade level, content, standards, item type, which made it much easier to choose the assessments that aligned with our goals. Additionally, Achieve the Core, the math focus standards, and the SBAC summative assessment blueprints were essential tools in aligning our pacing and selecting the appropriate assessments of all of these resources, and they're included in the resource document attached. In conclusion, the variety of resources provided by Smarter Balance has enabled our district to effectively integrate formative assessments, enhance teaching, improve data analysis, and most importantly, support student learning. Furthermore, we are now able to better support students with accommodations and designated supports, ensuring they are more successful on the summative assessments.
Thank you so much, Shannon and Kristen. I can't agree with you more on many of those. And actually, some of the questions we received were very specific to a lot of what you were mentioning. I will start with just a broad, actually, I'll focus on a question related to accommodations and designated supports that we received. And either one of you can feel free to answer. It was someone who mentioned it is not teaching to the test, as we mentioned earlier. It is an issue of equity. Students who have accommodations and designated supports have the right to be able to try out those features. So there wasn't a question, but it just re-emphasized what it is that you all were sharing. So anything to share about that as you guys just spoke about the accommodations and designated supports?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. That was our biggest push the first of the year last year, was making sure that all students had the accessibilities from the very beginning of the year. And I think the interim assessments do a great job of that. Like August and Amy had mentioned in their previous set of presentations, the whole point of taking an interim is giving the students the opportunity to see the platform, because it's identical to the summative platform. So then you're reducing the barriers and they're getting time to practice how to utilize those tools so that they're effective when when they're using them.
Thank you. Yeah, that is something that we do stress the importance of, because you just don't want to surprise students. And then I was a teacher administering these interim assessments to my students before years ago, but I do remember students focusing more on those accessibility resources and tools rather than the test content. And that's not what you want to do when you get to the summative. So this is the perfect opportunity for that.
Yeah, and another thing we mentioned in our presentation about various platforms that we utilize, and that was also our struggle, is the text-to-speech feature on one platform was very different than the text-to-speech feature on the summative assessment. So the students were getting practice, but it was still very complicated on how to utilize that appropriately. So it was still a barrier.
Perfect. And I do have, I noticed you guys mentioned the Riverside County Office of Education resource. That is also one that I am familiar with. We don't have it on our website because it is Riverside County's. However, I do know how to access it, but it is something that a few folks have requested. So I do want to point out that Shannon and Kristen's email address is on the resource guide, as well as all of our presenters. So if you do want to reach out to them for any resources, feel free to email them, and they can help you out there. And feel free to email the CAASPP inbox as well, and we can provide any CDE related resources or provided resources. I do have a question in here about the process of aligning interims to essential standards. I know you talked a little about this as well as the presenters beforehand. So do you have any recommendations? I know essential standards, focus standards, we hear that a lot and we get that question. So how would you recommend doing that within your LEA?
Yeah. So what we did is we took all of the curriculum for the 3rd through 8th grade classes, and we looked over what essential standards or what focus standards were being assessed within those particular units. And then we basically went from there and looked at all of the IABs and FIABs that were available. And we decided, based on the targets and standards that were addressed in those IABs, did they align closely to the unit enough? Did they have enough of those standards to where it would be a true assessment of skills? And that's how we did it as a district. We only selected a few at the beginning of the year just so that we could transition everyone into the idea of giving them, and then, you know, offer them that feedback on SIRS so they could see that the results were very valuable. And then with the committee, like we mentioned in our presentation, they did all of that work. We, you know, provided them with substitutes for several weeks, and we sat together as a team, and Kristen was one of them. And we really just dove really deeply into every component of the curriculum throughout the year and basically paced our entire year out so that everything was kind of aligned. It was a big process, but I know that it's worth it because we're seeing the results in such a quick amount of time.
Great. I do have a couple questions too related to let's see, the order of, which kind of goes align with what you just mentioned there regarding pacing guides, what's determined, the order of IABs and focused IABs. I know some of those questions may have also been for Amy and August, so feel free to email them if you have any follow-up questions as well. Some of these I know are for a resource that is for the next presenter, so I'll hold on to that one. Regarding pre and post assessments, I know that one was mentioned by Amy. And so I'm not sure if Amy, you want to answer one. Amy Eastman, it was about using IABs as pre and post assessments. Can specific standards and or topics be selected to be included on an interim assessment block, or are they a set of questions that are assigned to a specific IAB? In other words, can the IABs be customized to meet the needs of the teacher? And actually, I can mention just on the CDE side, there is the interim assessment item portal that is available to teachers. And so if you have interim assessment access, you have access to the interim assessment item portal. That does have the ability to look for the different interim assessment items. You can look for them by standard. You can also look for them by test. So you can filter in any way. It also has the answer keys. So I know all teachers want answer keys. They don't have the time to go figure out the answers on all these tests. So you can print out an answer key. Remember, they are secure content. So you don't want to share them outside of the classroom. You don't want them getting out of that classroom. But those, the item portal does have the ability to look at the different items, but we caution, I know many educators like to build their own interim assessments. We don't advise that because the way the interim assessments from Smarter Balanced are packaged, they are thinking about all the things such as item difficulty level, different weighting of the specific items. So that wouldn't be taken into consideration if you just pick and choose interim assessment items and build your own test. That would not be included in the results. So you would just get 4 out of 5 as opposed to the results that are sent to SIRS, which are taking all that information into consideration. So that's really important to know. But as far as, yeah, pre-post tests or any of that information I mentioned, Shannon, Kristen, anything to share?
All right. Yes, I was part of the committee that actually aligned the FIABs with our pacing guide. And so this year we're implementing which different FIABs we're using with each unit. And what was really nice as a teacher, we know the flow of our curriculum, and we were able to see, are there essential standards that, for example, are taught at the beginning of the school year? And so by the time we get closer to the end of the year summative test, a lot of times students are not familiar with those. So instead of hitting a hard review in April, what we did is we rearranged our pacing guides. So that way our essential standards we had after Christmas time or after January. So it was fresh on the students' minds, and some of the other standards that were important, but not necessarily the big blocks, we were able to put that at the beginning of the school year. So by doing that, we were able to better align with what assessments that we wanted to put in for summative tests. As far as pre and post assessments, it was really nice to use our curriculum assessments in alignment with the FIABs to make sure we're getting a full spectrum of those standards.
Great. Yeah, I know that is a question we get a lot. So it's really neat to hear your story and how you got to where you are. So it's really evident that you guys have put in a lot of time, effort, collaboration. Any final words? We will be switching to the next set of presenters. But no. Thank you. We will bring you back into Q&A at the end if there are additional questions, and feel free to answer any that you see. You can type them in if they are specific to your content. But thank you, Shannon. Thank you, Kristen. It's great to hear about Reading Elementary School District, and we just appreciate you being here today. And we will turn to our final set of presenters with that. From Fontana Unified School District, we have Jennifer Bourgeois and Nasli Spence, and we are going to hear about how they support students with interim assessment resources and data. Dr. Jennifer Bourgeois is the Associate Superintendent of Fontana Unified School District, and Nasli Spence is the Coordinator of Secondary English at Fontana Unified School District. So we will turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Becky. Good afternoon, everyone. We're very privileged to have this opportunity to share a little bit about some of the things that we're doing in Fontana Unified. And so as we get started, it's important to anchor us in our context. And for our context for our district, we have 46 schools, which include 30 elementary, 7 middle, 7 high school, and adult school. And then because of needs for our families, we also have an online way for our students to learn. Our breakdown, as you can see, is just over a quarter of our students are identified as English learners. We have 12% roughly that are special ed. And then as you can see, a large percentage of our population that we are serving is considered socioeconomically disadvantaged. So when you think about that broad perspective of our students, we have a variety of needs to be met in our TK-12 system with over 34,000 students. And as we go into our next topic, I want to really emphasize the importance of teamwork. We know that in order to provide the support for the district our size, as you just saw in the previous slide, collaboration and teamwork is absolutely essential. And it is essential to provide that rich learning experience for our scholars. The work we are sharing today involves partnerships between district office, where we reside up here, and Nasli will be speaking to her leadership in helping to move this work. Site admin, as they are boots on the ground, they know what's happening at their campuses around the needs, as well as we know teachers in the classroom and our instructional coaches. So that true collaboration and teamwork is paramount. Now today, in particular, we're going to be highlighting some of the work that we have done with our high schools. Now, keep in mind, as I shared, there are 7 high schools and every site is unique. And so their starting points on where the entry is to support them is also going to be unique. And we are going to really look at our data and our results to be able to eventually scale up and scale out. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to our coordinator of secondary ELA, Nasli Spence, to take us into a little bit more of the work.
Thank you, Dr. Bourgeois. In Fontana, we are fortunate to be in a place where many of our English teachers have had the opportunity to already explore and administer IEBs. So our focus at this time is more on the next steps for teachers, which include looking at student data and planning next steps, as Dr. Bourgeois mentioned. Our support for IEBs is not limited to just teachers. We also work with site administrators who oversee English, as they are a part of a critical support system for teachers and students. They're key partners in ensuring that we have a commitment to planning time for our teachers to do this great work. We start IEB conversations with administrators and teachers by first exploring English performance data from the CAASPP exam. We have found the target report available in SIRS to be a great starting point for these conversations. Looking at high-level trend data with our high school teachers allows us to reflect on several worthy topics, such as curriculum-embedded resources and site instructional initiatives, etc. Once data is reviewed, teachers are given time in their professional learning communities to explore IEBs using the viewing system in order to determine which IEB and which FIEB they will administer. We've created resources to help guide teachers through this process. For example, we have created a suggested calendar that aligns standards addressed within our pacing guides so that the IEB can have a dual purpose, not only to expose students to English CAASPP-like items, but also to provide data on how students are doing with a set of standards. We always want to be mindful of the various challenges teachers have with giving other required assessments. So we want to be as intentional and strategic as possible so that this doesn't feel like one more thing that impacts our teachers' time with students. Another resource we created is a list of skills that can be found within an IEB. Due to time constraints, teachers can't always click through all of the questions within an IEB. So to help them out, we use the skills listed within the Interim Connection playlist, along with information that we've collected along the way by our own clicking through IEBs. And we've created a skills at a glance document where we list the various skills standards that are addressed on the IEB, so teachers have a better idea of which type of IEB they are selecting without having to go through the whole process of clicking through themselves. The Connections playlist is located in Tools for Teachers, which has been in general a website that our teachers have enjoyed exploring. In addition to the skills listed, the Connections playlist includes a list of academic vocabulary terms, as well as suggestions for intervention that our teachers have found beneficial when planning for instruction. An additional test that our teachers don't typically select as part of this process is the ICA, which was mentioned by Humboldt earlier in our presentation. However, some of our teachers choose to use the ICA not in an IEB format, but more so in the spring to give grade 9 and 10 students experience with a CAASPP-like test, while the 11th graders are taking the ELA math CAASPP. 9 and 10 grade students are also on block schedules, so that turns out to be a really good time for them to have access to an ICA and experience a part of that assessment. Last year, we provided our teachers with district-wide grade level PD days. As our title slide shows, high expectations equals high support. We understand this is a heavy lift for our teachers to be engaging in the IEBs, and so we make sure that they have the time needed to get familiar with these resources. During our district level PD days, we discuss ELA CAASPP resources, including IEBs and tools for teachers, as well as the target reports that I mentioned earlier. Quick side note, target reports are not available for interim assessments. These are only available for CAASPP English Summative and Math. However, those do yield really important data for us that helps us select IEBs as we move forward. Some high schools provide their PLCs with PD days specifically for planning around the English CAASPP. These site plan days occur immediately following an IEB exam in order to give teachers time to analyze data and plan next steps. During these meetings, our instructional coaches facilitate conversations by having teachers work through a data analysis protocol that focuses on questions like, were there visible patterns for how questions were answered incorrectly, as well as those that were answered correctly? What was the difficulty level of that question? Was the item type problematic? For example, was it part A, part B? Was it multi-select? Were there keywords in the STEM that may have caused confusion? For example, key detail versus textual evidence. We also look at the key distractor analysis that's provided within the IEB as a possible source of challenge for students. The discussions that follow are rich, and our teachers who are eager to help our students and just natural problem solvers usually immediately launch right into planning for next steps. As previously mentioned, our district is fortunate to be able to provide sites with ELA coaches who support and are just a great overall benefit to our teachers. Our coaches and teachers work collaboratively to develop and create resources for instructional next steps with students. We use a viewing system to provide students with time in pairs or groups to reflect on selected items that the teacher has identified for deeper analysis. We then have a variety of activities that we engage students in to address some of the challenges identified during our data analysis protocol. These strategies are less time intensive than some of the other things we do. We want teachers to embed this type of work as organically as possible, so we are mindful of the time dedication. We try to limit work to small time chunks such as do now or bell work. Some strategy examples include reviewing item types with students, having students justify the reason for why an answer is right or wrong, always in pairs or groups so that kids can have a thought partner to discuss this information with. We like to pair item STEM questions with text that they're already reading in class. And we love a grappling strategy that we've modeled in several of our classrooms and we've seen effective in getting to some of those IEB questions that ask students to choose the best answer. And there may be quite a few reasonable choices. So we have teachers model essentially the metacognitive process of grappling. So they may take quotes and put them up on the board and have kids look at details and textual evidence to determine the answer in a whole group setting. Lastly, the smarter annotated response tool can be the most time intensive of the resources that we use here in Fontana. However, it is by far one of our coaches and teachers' favorite CAASPP tools. This tool has also been a hit with our administrators and just other staff that supports, for example, aides in the classroom and so on. The URL for the annotated response tool is in the resource guide and is a publicly available tool. Assigning the performance task IEB is a tough sell for teachers because of the time required for students to complete the IEB, as well as the time needed for teachers to go in and hand score, as has been previously mentioned by other presenters. When we attempted to have teachers gather together to calibrate essays, it was always challenging when they were their own student essays, because there may not have been a clean example of a perfect 1, 2, 3, or 4 scored essay using the CAASPP rubric. Additionally, having teachers have to grade all of these essays and make copies to share it for calibration was logistically really challenging. This option has saved us tons of time. We used this tool last year for one of our grade level district PD days. We gave teachers copies of the sample performance task essay, but we did not share the score. Teachers calibrated with their table and agreed to a score. Great conversations occurred and teachers immediately began to discuss how this would be a beneficial experience for students to have as well. Many teachers gave us feedback that they went back to their classrooms and facilitated the same activity and how they saw that it was beneficial to model an exemplar paper for students so they could see what a 4 looks like. Additionally, teachers shared that it was a confidence booster for their students who strongly felt that they could produce a 4 paper after seeing what a 4 looks like. According to CAASPP, the papers that scored a 2 or a 3 were also beneficial to our teachers. We encourage them to have students edit and revise those papers and turn them into 4s. Teachers share that the edit revise part of the writing process is sometimes rushed through during a process paper, and that this provided them a quick way to practice those skills without having to assign an essay. This brings me to the end of my portion of the presentation. I hope the information shared was helpful as you consider next steps for the interim assessments. I'll hand it over to Dr. Bourgeois, who will share what our district next steps look like for this school year.
Thank you, Nasli. So as we go into, well, we're early into the 24-25 school year, and we are again committed to supporting our teachers with this time to explore the IABs as well as data analysis. The way that we are doing that is around design and not by chance. And what I mean by that is we are providing 2 grade level professional learning days, one in first semester, one in second semester, for teachers to be pulled out of class to be able to go through this work. So for example, all grade 7 teachers for ELA will be pulled out to be able to provide the necessary time to dig in, as Nasli described our process. Additionally, we are encouraged by our recent gains in student achievement, and we look forward to another great year with staff and students as we continue to look at our landscape, look at the data, and be able to be intentional around our, again, creation of a system that is by design and not by chance to provide teachers with the support they need to be able to support our scholars. And I'd like to put a little plug in for our colleague, my colleague on the call, and Nasli will be presenting at the California Assessment Conference, and she's going to talk a little bit more about some of the great work that we're doing over here in Fontana Unified. And I would encourage you, if you haven't signed up yet, I understand there's a few spots left, but I really encourage you, if you haven't gone to the California Assessment Conference, it's a wonderful place to share best practices. And we are thrilled to be able to have a team from Fontana representing and sharing more work that we're doing here to support our scholars. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer and Nasli. And yes, we're looking forward to hearing Nasli speak as well and share even more information that you guys are doing. And I'm really, really touched on how you guys shared the next step for students and teachers, since the resources really are about not only supporting the teacher, but the student as the ultimate goal. So thank you for reminding us of that. And also, as a reminder for all, when analyzing data from interim assessments, just one thing I want to note from the CDE side, it's important to use multiple measures, which they mentioned as well. So in fact, we do have Education Code 60642.6a, which states that interim assessment should be used in combination with other resources of information that teachers have about their students' progress. So that's always important to keep in your mind as you're doing the things that were mentioned here today. So we have a few moments to answer a few questions. I did see a few of them were answered, so thank you guys so much for doing that on the back end. I do know too, in the Google folder, there was one resource that was added on its own, and it was a pacing guide, I believe, for IABs for grades 9 through 11. There was a question, is there one for grades 3 through 5, or is this something that you guys have done for the higher grade levels only? So I'll let you respond to that.
And so as my title mentioned, I support secondary English. And so the reason the 9 to 11 is there is because that's part of the work that I do. I do not have one for grades 3 through 5. And it's really, all it is just, we took a look at our curriculum guides, we took a look at our textbooks, and we just went and found the best fits for which IABs are, or FIABs would be great for assessing during that chunk of learning based on the standards. And so that could easily be replicated. And it's specific to our textbooks. So that wouldn't be like a general resource. You would have to go in there and make sure that it fits your pacing guide and your textbook materials.
Thank you. I know all these resources educators are so excited to get their hands on, so we appreciate you sharing. I did mention to a few folks who were asking about resources in the chat that they can access your email addresses, which you so graciously shared on the resource guide. Thank you so much. And then also there is a question about the education code that I mentioned. It is Education Code 60642.6a. So if you are looking for any information that will, stress the importance of using interim assessments in combination with other resources to gauge students' progress, that one is a great one to pull out to support what it is that you are doing. So I do see some shout outs from people from your LEA, so that's great. And yes, we could put that education code in the chat for you. It's 606, let's see, 60642. I just want to make sure I get the right one, 0.6A. So yes, thank you, Amy. So yeah, if there are any final remarks, I know you mentioned many resources that you all have done or used, such as SIRS. I noticed you mentioned the Smarter Annotated Response tool, which is one that was specific to your presentation. So there are so many tools, so many great resources. So I'm so excited that a lot of you have jumped in to decide which resources work best for your site. And so any final remarks before we share many resources with you? So we have a lot left to share about resources, but any final remarks from your LEA?
I would just like to say a couple of things, that the local context is super critical as you are looking to infuse using interim assessments in a very intentional way, really understanding where is your entry point. And Nasli really did an outstanding job of finding out that entry point to be able to bring this work forward. And then the other part is really taking a moment to look at the data, right? Because if we're really targeted and strategic around the specific data, that will also help to find that entry point around where are people at to move this work forward. So near and dear to my heart, by design and not by chance. And that's the work that we are creating here with creating those conditions. So thank you so much. Nasli, I don't know if you want to chime in with any additional component.
Yeah, well, that's all. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. We're so excited to have everyone present with us today. And so thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Nasli. We are going to now turn to many of the resources that you all have mentioned. So if some of the folks on the call today are wondering where to get this information, now is the time to listen in. Now that you've heard all these great examples and how to get started using the interim assessments at your sites and districts, we will focus on a few of them and how to see which ones to use. So we will turn to the next slide and dive right in. So new this year is a resource that can help educators determine when and how to incorporate the interim assessments into their instructional planning. The Interim Assessment Lookup Tool is a web page allowing educators to search all the available interim assessments, not only for Smarter Balance, ELA, and Math, but CAASPP and ELPAC. The interim assessments at a glance and by grade, which are 2 PDF documents, which you may be familiar with from previous years, have now been combined into a very dynamic web page that includes all interim assessments available for the current school year. And a filter option for the content area, the grade, and the tests, which require hand scoring, allows for a much easier filtering of all this content as well. With the lookup tool, educators can view the interim assessments at a glance in that format, which lists all the interim assessments available for the current school year. This view also indicates with an asterisk which of the interims are new this year, because there are some new for ELA and Math, and as does the section with the interim assessments by grade view, which also includes the content alignment, total number of items, and the number of items that need to be hand scored. A reminder that all interim assessments, the hand scoring must be done locally. So as mentioned earlier, you might want to start small and you can filter for the hand scored options if necessary, just to avoid those and start small if you would choose to do so. And because of the many details that this resource includes, it can be very helpful to teachers in planning which interims they'd like to use at different points of the school year, just as we heard educators share today. It is also helpful to administrators who are interested in either introducing the interims to their staff or introducing interims that require hand scoring. So, for example, if educators are new and you're introducing the interims for the very first time, again, you might encourage them to start with an IAB that requires no hand scoring. That way the results will appear in SIRS when the student submits their test. And then CDE also provides many great resources to help educators on the next slide, perfect, who wish to implement the interim assessments at their sites or districts. A few key resources are the Interim Assessment Overview document, which describes the Smarter Balanced interim assessments, including their purpose, use, and varieties. For ELA and math, this document provides a list of interim assessments available for the 2024-25 school year. It is a Smarter Balanced document, so you'll see ELA and math only. Another helpful resource, including or especially for those who like videos, is the Interim Assessment video series, which is a companion to the user guide. So you'll see the user guide on there at the top. That is one which I highly recommend you take a look at, just to find all the different ways to use the interim assessments, the features, and with screenshots that'll show you just how to use it. The other one, the video series, it consists of 6 modules that provide a general introduction to the content and purpose of interim assessments and how to use related systems and resources. The 6 module series covers a general introduction, the interim assessment viewing system, administration, scoring the interim assessments, and a final video about SIRS, which has been mentioned here many times today. Each video is approximately 4 to 10 minutes, which makes them very manageable to fit into busy schedules and get the information you need quickly. The final resource I have to share is the Interim Assessment Viewing System. This resource allows teachers to preview all available interim assessments just as the students see them in this student interface. This is, I know Shannon and Kristen mentioned earlier today. So if you want to understand the types of questions and the scope of content on the interim assessments, which is very helpful to teachers to use together in a PLC, it also enables them to demonstrate for students how to use the embedded accessibility resources again, which is what was mentioned earlier, so such as the highlighter, the masking tool, and the line reader. It is important to note that responses are not saved in the viewing system or scored or submitted when using the viewing system. So it's just that, a viewing system, to take a look at it. And it's an excellent resource to use in a formative way with students. It can be used to display an item for the class, model different ways to solve a question or different types of questions, or talk through the questions together as a whole class, giving students an understanding of the structure and expectations of Smarter Balanced assessments. Remember that you can find direct links to the resources I shared today in your resource guide, as well as all the related resources that the presenter shared. On the next few slides, I'll share a few training opportunities hosted by the CDE, which are all free of cost for educators to attend. The Interim Informative Assessment Training Series, which consists of 3 modules, provides facilitated online training focused on leveraging the interim and formative components of the CAASPP and ELPAC comprehensive system of assessments to inform teaching and learning. Module 1 focuses on using the formative assessment process and tools for teachers to boost instruction. Module 2 on gauging student progress with the CAASPP and ELPAC interim assessments. And Module 3, which many of you had a few questions about, focusing on interim assessment hand scoring. The hand scoring module is separated into 4 sections, A, B, C, and D, based on the interim assessment for ELA, math, CAASPP, and ELPAC. This training just wrapped up with its summer and back to school sessions, but you can find, as mentioned earlier, the recordings and materials posted on the CAASPP and ELPAC website and in your resource guide. Another place to find where recordings and materials from trainings are posted in the on-demand and recorded trainings section of the CAASPP and ELPAC website under the Training and Communications tab. For the on-demand options, which again was mentioned earlier, the interim assessment hand scoring training modules, they provide educators the opportunity to learn at their own pace and at a time that is convenient to them about the hand scoring process for all interim assessments, ELA, math, CAASPP, and ELPAC. There is also an Introduction to SIRS micro learning series, which is new this year. And it is a series of short videos which offer the flexibility for learners to watch the entire training or to view specific topics or segments of interest. And again, recordings are all available. Previous trainings and webinars like this will be in that section on the CAASPP and ELPAC webpage as well. And there are also live trainings available for those who want to learn more about the features and functions of SIRS. 2 types of trainings for specific audiences, and 2 sessions offered for each training. The first sessions for these trainings are already happened, but there is another offering available for the Introduction to STRS for Training or Test Coordinators and Administrators that will be held on October 8th from 8:30 to 11:30 a.m. There is also an Introduction to STRS for Teachers training that will be held later that afternoon on October 8th from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. These are facilitated trainings with breakout rooms and time to practice with the system and features. And finally, I would like to remind you of the new CAASPP and ELPAC combined website, which I've mentioned just a few times today. The combined website can be found on caaspp-elpac.org. And here you will find information about and links to the various resources we talked about today, including the interim assessments, tools for teachers, the California Educator Reporting System, and many professional learning opportunities. Again, all the trainings and links can be found in your resource guide, and registration is available on the combined CAASPP and ELPAC website. Details and trainings, again, can be found under the Training and Communications tab on the upcoming and on-demand training section. And with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today and wish you a very smooth school year ahead. And I'll pass it off to Amy to bring us to a close.
Thank you, Becky. So you'll notice that I have turned on the chat box for all of you because we have an exit ticket for you today. So to end our time together, please share in the chat box one key takeaway that you're going to be using in your own teaching or sharing with your colleagues. So that is your exit ticket. Go ahead and drop in the chat anything that you are taking away with you today. And I'm going to wrap up with just a couple of other pieces of information while you type. We also want to encourage you to subscribe to the Assessment Spotlight. This communication goes out every Friday and includes the latest updates from our assessment division. You can also follow us on X. Our handle is @CDE Assessments. And you can also follow the CDE on Instagram and Facebook as well. We also have more sessions in our series, so we'd like to encourage you to come back again next week and the week after that. Our next session is going to be focusing on the ELPAC interim assessments and is going to be held at the same time, 3:30 on September 24th. And then our final webinar will focus on the CAST interim assessments and will be held on October 1st from 3:30 to 5 p.m. This is a great opportunity to hear from your colleagues around the state and get ideas for local application to use for interim assessments and related resources. So we hope to see you there for that. And with that, that brings us to the end. As we always say, we are your partners in this work, and we're happy that you came today. Have a great rest of your day. Bye, everyone.